Okay, welcome back to the second part in the series where I am creating some sort of Ash Wastes walker vehicle constructed out of a Hubba Bubba packet as its main body, and then various items from the bits box super glued on to make some sort of 40k necromunda Ash Wastes inspired object. Just used the Tamiya light grey primer, erring on the side of a light coat rather than going too heavy, and then any areas that I want to catch where you can still see a bit of colour of the plastic below, I've just gone over that with some grey paint just to complete it. So next I'm going to go in with a few airbrush colours, just various shades of brown in reddy brown colours, and I'm just going to mainly focus on the upper surfaces with that, just to get a general rust layer put down. Just before turning on the airbrush, what I've just done is in the lens there and up on the light, the hanging light, I've used some masking fluid. Might as well try and protect those areas and not get them covered in various coats of paint, because I'll be trying to keep that as a light if I can later on when I paint it. And I've also masked off that control panel just a little bit there, just to help keep some of the paint off of there. So things kind of developed as I was working on it, and I started off trying to put down that rust layer, various browns, and it was, working as normal, but the way that I was doing it in terms of shooting from above left me with this natural gradient from the brown down to that more creamy beige colour, and it just started looking more like a crab shell sort of paint scheme. So I just leant into it and went with it. I think sometimes you just have to do that when you're painting things, and if you don't really have much of a plan, which I don't, you just see what happens. So I let the airbrush get a bit not clogged up, but it was splattering and leaving lots of little dots and things, and that just plays into the effect that I'm going for. If I'm trying to do this kind of crab shell look. And then towards the end there, I added in a bit of a blue colour. Some of those shells do have, and this is what I've ended up with. So the basic colouring is there now. I think I'll go with that. I think that's quite a fun colour scheme to leave on it. It's still a mixture of worn, rusty looking colours, but it just happens to also tie in with the whole thing looking a bit crab-like or a bit insect-like. Just starting to block in some of these feature colours. It's really going to help improve the overall look. Definitely need a couple of coats on these sorts of items. And just using the Tamiya XF1 to paint in cables and these conduits. This is the flat black, which really does dry to a nice matte finish, which I think looks good on these sorts of hoses and things like that. It's one of these ones you can't mess around with it too much though. When you paint it on, you can sort of tend to mess up the finish if you do too much with the brush. You've got to kind of just get it on one pass if possible. Just add in some Vallejo metal colour to these parts in the hydraulic cylinders, if that's what they are. Really good metal colour. or metal paint, this goes on really smooth. This really helps convey that these are sliding cylinders. Yeah, I think I'll do this long thin one also. So you can see that control panel is really bright, having been masked from all the spraying earlier. I'm going to try and keep the screens clean. For the rest of it, I'm just going to go over it with this grey colour. Try and do it as neat as I can. You can see how the masking on the control panel here worked really well. Just going to try and keep these screens themselves in that light grey, and go around the rest with a darker colour. Probably need 2 or 3 coats to get a smooth finish. In terms of doing these screens on the control panel, I'm going to use this Green Stuff World Fluor lime colour, really nice bright fluorescent lime finish. The only thing is you've really got to mix it up, and it tends to settle and really firm up. So I've added a little ball bearing in there just to help mix it up, but you usually have to go in with a stick or something and try and break it up again. Fine going over the edge, because that'll just enhance the sense of a glow. Don't muck around with it too much. It will settle down vertically, just due to the position of the screen. I think I'll paint this little statue thing, some brass. I've put a little mascall onto this little panel, and just going to paint right over that whole panel now. Just using a neutral grey colour, nothing too stand out. Try to keep the colour scheme nice and limited, don't want to get too many different bright colours. I just leave the edge without the paint on it, and then I can come back and add a little bit of metal to the outside edge, or at least cut recently so it's not rusted up yet. Just using the scalpel to pick away the masking fluid. The padding on the seat, could go with anything really, but I'm just going to use this grey purple colour. I think maybe just some yellow wash on this lamp over the white areas now, and then on the main lamp at the front also. Start using some typhus corrosion now, just with an old brush here and there. Not going to go crazy with this stuff because it can take over a little bit. What I'll do is put some on the brush and then kind of just mess it around and break it up. I'll just do a few bits here and there, but it makes sense. Just want to break up any obvious edges where the paint's been added. It can be useful around the areas where you intend to maybe dry brush on some more orange colour, like a riser rust. But yeah, this stuff's a real brush wrecker, so don't use your best. Just adds a bit more variety and texture to those rustier areas. Just onto the riser rust now. It is one of these dry paints intended for dry brushing. It's just starting to get a bit too dry. Mainly just going over the areas where I put the typhus corrosion, which has added a kind of gritty, sandy texture that the riser rust can catch on. It's another brush wrecker process, this one. I think just to finish the painting stage before moving on to the enamel washes and final weathering, I'm just going to do some standard Citadel shades on the objects that need that. I think largely I'm going to use Seraphim Sepia. It's a nice general wash to use. Don't want to get too carried away with having to highlight and layer things, so probably just going to be leaving it to finish with the shades. Keep the colour scheme low key, but it's certainly worth doing a pass of shades over the colours that need it, just to improve the finish. Seraphim Sepia is a good choice for that, because you can essentially go over pretty much any colour with it. It'll dirty it down and hopefully give it that necromunda ash waste look. Just a bit of non-oil on the control panel. Just looking to see if I can get these little keypads and things to stand out a bit more. For a modern production, it's like I think these are from Necromunda or Kill Team. The actual definition in the model isn't very good. I think the features would be a bit sharper. I'm using the AK Interactive Sand and Desert Camouflage Panel Liner. It's the one I've been using for a lot of these Ash Wastes terrain projects. And then I've got some thinners in the little tray here. And I'm just going to start dotting this in and around with plenty of thinner. Try and make it go a long way. Don't want to get too bogged down in every detail, but I am going to hit all the main ones with a splodge of the panel liner, and then I'm going to thin it away with the odourless thinners. Try and vary up how heavy I go with this, so it doesn't get too samey. And anywhere it tends to run, that's all fine, because it just makes it look like general wear and tear, and just all adds to it. So it's quite a quick process. I mean, it's a lot of fun doing it, just watching it move and spread around. And as always, this Sand and Desert panel liner, as it dries, will change quite a lot from what you see here. This kind of wet, almost green looking stuff dry off to be quite a dull sandy finish, dusty. And it's just a case of working around the model, hitting all the areas you want to hit. Try not to get my fingers in it while I'm working on it. I can change it up with some of the other panel liners I've got. A couple of darker ones that I can mix in for a bit of variation here and there. You can't really go wrong with it. It's pretty foolproof, I think. Essentially just looking for areas where the dirt and grime will collect and settle. Trying to avoid leaving any tide lines where it dries. But even then, because it's in an enamel wash, you can come back and reactivate it with the thinners to get rid of any of those tide lines. You can start to see how the stuff really adds that nice layer of dirt and grime and colour variation to these what were pretty simply painted and coloured in parts of the model. And as long as you've got plenty of the thinner to hand, you can just blend that away or change it or move it around or thin it out And it will change as it dries, you know, it'll become, you can see on this side already where it's become this nice dusty, coloured grey stuff. So it's never going to be as strong as it looks when you first put it on while it's wet. It changes to something much more subtle and convincing, really, as well, in this case, a sand and desert looking finish. I think as long as you just make sure that you're being varied in the density and the placement and the patterns that you're using, it just can't really help but make it look good, really. It's kind of an auto effect, as far as I can see. And the great thing with these enamel washes, as I've mentioned in previous videos, is that they are not going to affect your acrylic paints below. So you're not going to be melting away your time that you've spent on the previous layers. You know, this is all going to work on top of separately, which is a great thing about them. Another stage though where you want to be using an old brush. I think that's all the painting done now. Use a couple other enamel products on there. Just a few spots, engine oil. Just add something a bit glossy here and there. Just helps add a little bit of variation to the model. But in terms of the colouring generally, that's it. Quite happy with how that looks now. I think that's plenty. Last thing I'm going to do in terms of adding any more effects to this is use some metal looking pigment powder. I'm just going to use my finger to catch some exposed edges. It's a nice subtle effect, and it gives you quite a convincing sense of the thing being metal underneath that rust and paintwork. I think I'd said before that I might not put a base on this, but I think it's worth it just to give the model a bit more strength. Some thick polystyrene card, and I'll just do something that fits around the legs, and that'll give me something to glue the model onto. Okay, I've set up the base, as you can see there, cut out that shape from the polystyrene sheet, and then I've glued on a couple of resin pieces, some plastic parts, and that gives us this nice looking wasteland effect base for the model. The only thing that I did use to point out was some of this mineral texture gel, and that's useful for blending some of the larger parts, the resin parts, which would otherwise have a step down onto the polystyrene or the styrene base. This lets you kind of smooth that edge over. Then went over the whole thing with some PVA glue and sprinkled sand over it. Just a sand and small stone mix. I'm just going to give that a spray now. That'll help secure it all together, and then I can paint it up. I've gone over this with some XV88, which is my standard base and colour. Now I've got some Dawn Stone, and I'll do a coat of that onto the stone items, and then just an orangey brown colour for some of these old metal parts sticking out the ground. Do think it's worth spending a little bit of time making a decent base, especially if you're spending so long making your models and painting those up. I think it's worth putting a bit of effort into your bases with a consistent looking style across them all. Makes a huge difference. As a last step, I'm just going to go over the whole base with some Agrax Earthshade. Just going to tie it all together. Pretty watered down as well. That Agrax Earthshade, which is one of the newer versions of it, is dried really dark. It's not a big problem because I can dry brush this back with some XV88, but something just to note, you know, as they change the paint formula, they can act differently. So you can see it came out really dark here. Now a lot of this is going to be covered up later with some weathering powders, but nonetheless I'll do a couple passes of dry brushing on it as I would normally do. Reasonably heavy. Doesn't matter if I go over any of the grey items or other bits and pieces, it can all just mix in together. A little bit of Dawn Stone on the grey parts, and a bit of Tallarn Sand. And to finish off, maybe a little bit of Carrick Stone. Difficult to mess this sort of stuff up, you know, it's nice and easy to do and quick, and usually comes out pretty good using easy methods. Okay, time to glue this down, I think, before the final steps in terms of weathering. Just going to use a blob of super glue. Should be enough to hold it. And then it'll just be a case of blending those little areas in. Just need to put some loose sand. I'll knock off the excess. Should make for quite a strong point of contact with the sand mixing in with the super glue. Okay, last task is the weathering powders. Just going to really use these on the base. Tend to work around the base in patches. I'm using a few different colours of weathering powder, so spread them out and do them in just different areas on the bases. These are the old Forge World weathering powders, which I doubt you can get anymore. I'll need to find an alternative when these run out. I really like that dusty Red Planet look that you get from these. Don't need to cover the whole base with the powder. Just like to have some patches, different colours, something like that. Okay, that's the model complete now. Pretty glad with the way it's come out. Most of it, if not all of it, is purely accidental. Nothing there was meant or planned. What you saw in the first video was the kit bash or the scratch build, where I started with that base object, the plastic packet for the main body, and then just stuck things onto it. But that's the beauty of doing a kit bash like this. You don't really know what's going to come out, and you can have a vague idea. You can base it on some examples like those in the art book that I showed you. But yeah, overall happy with the end result. It's kind of moved on slightly from being necessarily just a terrain piece where I had intended it to be. You could almost start using that in some sort of warband or skirmish game as a crawler vehicle, or in my case I would be looking at the rules for the old Necromunda stuff and the Ash Wastes additional rules that came in the Necromunda magazine. There's a lot of inspiration to be found in those sets of rules, the tables and the info that comes along with them, and you can really create all sorts of things based on that. I have looked out a couple of characters based on, I think these are Pig Iron Productions, the bodies are anyway, the heads are from somewhere else. It's kind of rebreather masks, helmet things. Kind of looks like a character that might be called Hubba Bubba, potentially. I think the vehicles would have 2 or 3 crew members. I've got a couple of them, and this would be a nice vehicle to go alongside them. But there is space on there to sit a couple of guys if I want. And you could look at kit bashing one to maybe sit up in the seat. So all that remains now is to give it a spray down with some monotone varnish, try and stop all that wither and powder coming off the base. It'll probably all come off. And then I'll set up a example scene with some other bits of terrain around it for some final shots. So hopefully you've enjoyed a couple of videos that I've done there, and as always, thanks very much for watching.